Hello and welcome to the tutorial for a giant yarn wreath. So inside your wreath kit you will have two balls of fluff. You'll have some pearl coloured acrylic mammoth yarn by Woolly Mahusive, and that's to make a bow or to use to decorate differently, which I can show you later on. And you will have about 300 grams of your main chosen colour. Now this yarn is unspun acrylic yarn. Often the biggest challenge is finding the end. There we are. So this is unspun acrylic yarn. So this yarn gets spun to make regular, or what I like to call skinny knitting yarn. That you would use on needles. So it's quite strong in that direction, but you can pull it apart because it's just the raw fibre. But once we've made it into stitches, it will stay looking lovely because it pulls nicely like that into stitches, and you get a nice smooth surface to your stitches too. So the first thing we're going to do, if I just remove the wreath ring that came with the kit, you're going to be using this to wrap the knitting around. So I'll put that to one side. Oh, one thing to mention also, this yarn occasionally has little bits that have split off from it like that, but you can literally just pull them off and smooth down the yarn. So it does occasionally split. Okay. So what we're going to do is to measure approximately the length of our forearm, a sort of a tail like that, which we're going to use at the end. And at that point we're going to measure, we're going to create a slip knot. So we're going to fold the yarn over itself. So I've just taken it from right, folded over to the left hand side like that. And then we're going to pick up the yarn that's on the top, and we're going to lift up the loop and literally go behind and pop that loop up through the crossed over yarn. So it comes out of the other side like that. I'll just do that one more time. So we're crossing the yarn over itself, and then we're taking the yarn that's over the front like that. If I lift that up, we're taking that and going from underneath at the back, and we're just popping a loop up through that original loop. And if I pull on the tail, it will tighten into a knot. And if I pull on the working yarn end, so the yarn going to the ball, it changes the size or the height of our loop. Okay, so that's the first stage. So we need to get to that point. Now the size of the loop, you want it really to be about 1.5 to 2 inches high, just enough room for your thumb and your forefinger to be able to move around inside, but not sort of to be able to move massively inside. So just a tiny little bit of movement you want, because you need to be able to reach inside the loops and pull loops through those existing loops. So what we're going to do is, if we put our yarn over to the left hand side of where we're working, and we take the tail and rest it over to the right hand side of where we're working, we're going to pop our finger and thumb through the loop, pointing to the left hand side of the table. Okay, and what we're going to do is pick up the working yarn going to the ball. We're going to pick that up with our thumb and index finger. We're just going to grab hold of it and just help it through with your other hand, pull through another loop that's the same size. Okay, now that second loop, it'll come through vertically like that. What I want you to do is just to twist it flat so that it lays flat on top of the first loop. And you'll start to see that it kind of looks a little bit like a plait. Okay, so this is a chain we're making here. If you know crochet, it's a very similar thing. So we're going to put your finger and thumb through that new loop, pointing to the left, and we're going to pick up the working yarn again and pull it up. It'll come up through vertically, give it a twist and lay it flat. Okay, so we've done that twice. We're going to do it one more time. Okay, so we're going in through the top of the loop. You see I'm popping my fingers down, diving in through the top, picking up the yarn, pulling it up and twisting it flat. Okay, so that's basically formed the end of our piece of knitting. We're going to be making a long rectangular shape of knitted fabric, if you like, a long rectangular shape, which will then curve around the frame. So what we need to do is start travelling vertically. So we've been travelling horizontally from right to left, and now we're going to travel vertically. So this last loop, I want you to turn it 90 degrees now. So it's already lying flat, but we're just going to twist it so that it's pointing upwards. And now we're going to move our ball of yarn, unravel ourselves a little bit, and we're going to move the yarn over to the right hand side. There'll be quite a lot of shifting of this ball of yarn as you go, but it will make life much, much easier. So if I lay the yarn over the top like that, we are travelling in the direction that the yarn is pointing to the ball. Okay, so that's our first loop. Now we're going to move along to the second loop to make a stitch. Now if I show you a bit closer, so we've got the knot, then we've got one stitch which is this sort of V shape, the second stitch is another V shape, and the third stitch is a V shape. Okay, so we're going to be working into the top loop of that V. So this stitch here, the last one we've just made, is actually already coming out from underneath. Because we've turned it, it's coming out from underneath that top loop of the end stitch there. So we're going to go into the next one along from the top. So we're going to put our fingers, create a little bit of a gap there, pop our fingers through the top, grab hold of the working yarn underneath, so grab it with our finger and thumb like that, and we're going to pull up another loop. So it's just hanging out there, like that. Okay, so if I lay it flat, you'll be able to see. So we've got two loops coming out of these two stitches, these chain stitches here. And then finally, we're going to our third V here. Don't know if you can see that. So we come out of that middle one, now we're coming to the third one. We're going to make a space there, pop our fingers through the top, grab the working yarn at the back and pull it up through so that we have a third stitch. Okay, so we've got these three loops pointing upwards on the table. And now we're effectively going to be travelling back in the other direction, and our entire work will be travelling left and right, creating stitches. So we're creating rows, more and more rows of stitches. So every time we change direction, it's going to help you to move the ball over to the other side so that the yarn is ready and waiting for you to collect it with your fingers as you travel from right to left in this case. So we have our 3 stitches in a row, and now we're going in to the stitch we've just made. So when you get to the end of a row, you go back into the stitch you make at the end to create your first one going back in the other direction. So fingers go down, dive in through the top, collect the yarn at the back and pull up another loop. So the aim of the game is to keep all these loops the same size. Okay, just going to unravel some more of my yarn. Okay, so you're going to pop your fingers through the top of the next loop, the middle loop, and pull the working yarn up so you have another loop hanging out there. And then finally the third loop in the row, up it comes, and there we have it. So you can start to see that lovely knitted stitch appearing, those lovely V shapes. Okay, so let's go back the other way. So we move the ball across so that the yarn's travelling in that direction, just to make it a bit easier for ourselves. And we go back into the stitch we've just made. pop our fingers through the front, grab the yarn at the back, pull a loop up through. We move to the next one, fingers through the front, grab the yarn at the back and pull up a loop. There we are. Just checking they're all similar size. And then the last one in the row, collect it at the back, pull the yarn through and just adjust to make sure it's all looking nice and even. So there we go. So you're going to literally change sides again, travel backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And you're going to keep going until the yarn is almost long enough to travel around your wreath ring. So I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. So if you just continue watching this video, it will speed up while I finish making this bit here, or you can pause me while you continue making yours and then resume if you want to see what happens when I get to the point where I want to test the length of it. Okay? Okay, so I've done a fair amount of knitting so far, and I just want to check how much further I've got to go. So if you take your knitting, if you take the end 3 loops, just pop your thumbs through them just to hold on to them so they don't disappear anywhere, and then take the bottom edge of your knitting, so where we started, and if you pull just gently, you'll see it will curl over. Can you see how it's curled up the edges? So if you gently pull like that, the edges will curl, and then if you have it upside down like that so that the curled edges are facing upwards, we're just going to pop our wreath frame into the middle and lift up the edges of our knitting on either side. And if you can you see the lovely stitches now, how they've grown? Now mine at the moment there's still a gap, at the top. So I need to do a couple more rows. But ultimately, we just want there to be a small gap, maybe an inch or so, between the ends of your knitting. We don't want there to be overlap, because we want it to be tightened together when we connect the two ends. We want them to have a little bit of tension so that it hugs the wreath ring really tightly. Okay, so I'm going to remove that now, and I'm just going to continue and do a couple more rows so I can flatten it out again to work with it. That's one row, and then we'll travel back that way and we'll measure again. Now you will probably find that you have some leftover yarn, because you've probably got about 50 grams or so more than you actually need, and that's so that you can use it to decorate and do exciting things with it. So let's try that again. Let's hold on to those and just pull the knitting. Don't be afraid to pull it a little bit. It's not going to ruin it. In fact, it's going to help it hug around the wreath ring. So we'll pop that in, curl up one side, and then we'll curl up the other side. In fact, I've gone one row too far. Can you see my loops are now overlapping the first edge? So I'm going to actually undo my last row. There we go. Let's see what a difference that makes. That's about right. So can you see even my loops, the ends of my loops are not touching. There's a tiny gap there, and that's just about right. So what we're going to do now is use the little tail that we measured at the beginning to close this gap up. So we have 3 stitches in a row. Okay, we know that already. So with our 3 stitches facing this way, they have an opposite number on the other side, because we started with 3 and we've ended with 3. So if you have a look, we've got 1 loop there, 2nd loop, 3rd loop. That's our knot, so I'm going to ignore that. But we have 1, 2, 3 loops on that side, and then obviously our unfinished loops here that are hanging out on the opposite side. And what we're going to do is use our tail that we measured at the beginning to connect. So I'm taking it from the end that comes out of the knot where it originates, and I'm just going to hold on to the end, and I'm just going to post it through the opposite loop, unfinished loop that's hanging out on the other side. So I'm just going to post it through from underneath and pull that through. Okay, now don't worry about the yarn that is still connected that you've been working with. We're going to chop that off and deal with that in a moment, but first of all, just want you to connect the 2 sides. Okay, so now if I turn it on its end, we've connected the first loop, and from here we're going across under the first of the 3 loops on the other side. Okay, so that is now dealt with. We've now dealt with 1 loop on that side, 1 loop on that side, and connected the 2. And now we're going to zigzag back across to the middle loop. So we're going from the underneath through that middle loop, pull it through, and now to connect it back to this side, we're going under the middle loop on the other side. So we're just literally zigzagging across as if we're stitching it together. And then finally we're going from this side. Last time it's going to travel to the left hand side, we're going to collect that last loop and then just turn it over because it's easier to see. Going to find our first loop on that side to connect it to. Okay, and then you might just want to adjust how it sits. There we are. So we've connected the wreath around the knitting around the hoop. Don't worry about any exposed wire frame that you can see in there. We're going to hide that in a moment. Okay, so if you move on to the next video, I'm going to show you how to finish off the wreath so that the main wreath is complete, and then look at different ways we can decorate it. Okay.